Welcome to Mongabay Sessions. I have with me eminent historian Dr. Ramachandra Guha, who's known for his prolific writings on Indian history, environment history, and cricket history. This conversation is in the shadow of the news of the death of India's eminent ecologist, Dr. Madhav Gadgil. In 1993 and 1995, Ramachandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil co-authored two books, This Fissured Land and Ecology and Equity, which have become textbook-like reference material for anybody in the environment field in India. Dr. Ramachandra Guha, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Gopi.
I know this is difficult to do immediately after somebody has passed on, but as a contemporary historian, how do you summarize the impact of Madhav Gadgil? What are his distinguishing features that gives him a place in history?
There were many different aspects to Professor Madhav Gadgil's life. To begin with, he was an outstanding scientist. His early papers in mathematical ecology, which were published out of his PhD thesis at Harvard, are still cited. In fact, they're citation classics. They've been cited thousands of times. He nurtured and mentored many outstanding PhD students, including people like R. Sukumar, who's India's leading elephant expert. The books he wrote with me on environmental history are still, used, cited, as you said. So the quality of his scientific work was absolutely at the top, as good as any other Indian scientist. Not just in his field, of course, he was preeminent, but if you compare him with Indian physicists, Indian biologists, Indian chemists, it's of that quality. He was a globally acclaimed scientist for his research, cutting-edge research. The second aspect of his work was his remarkable ability to collaborate with different kinds of people. His early work with the anthropologist Kailash Malhotra on pastoralism, his work with V.D. Vartak on sacred groves, then later his work with me on environmental history, his work with his student S.N. Prasad on bamboo in the Western Ghats, with his other student, on sacred groves again in the Western Ghats. So he had and not just with students, with ordinary people, with activists, with journalists. He had the thing about Professor Gadgil, and this is the last part of his work, he was a deeply democratic scientist who wanted to bend his research to the improvement of the lives of nature and people. His autobiography is called I'll Walk Up the Hill, A Life with Nature and People. So he spoke many languages. He spoke Hindi, he spoke Marathi, he spoke Kannada, he spoke English. He was a ceaseless field worker, and he talked to everyone. He treated everyone as equal. So a Harvard or Cambridge professor, a doctoral student, an Arekanat farmer in Uttar Kannada, a fishing family in Kerala, because he works for Kerala. So he had that remarkably egalitarian temperament and the ability to meet, listen to all kinds of Indians, because that is very rare, not just among eminent scientists, but among eminent Indians. You won't find corporate leaders or sports people or film stars really having that accessibility, that deep wish to know what their fellow citizens think, want, desire. So there were these different aspects to his work which made him absolutely unique in the Indian scientific firmament. You would have scientists who do grassroots work but haven't produced that kind of cutting-edge research of world quality. You would have world-class scientists who are just cocooned in their laboratory and never mingle with their fellow citizens. And then, of course, is multilingualism. The last thing I'd say, Madhav was, Professor Gadgil was born and raised in Maharashtra, then he studied overseas. He came back to Karnataka, and Karnataka was his adopted home state. But he learned fluent Kannada, including read and write. And after retirement, he went back to Pune and started writing popular articles on science in Marathi, in his mother tongue. So and you will not, except possibly for Jayant Narlikar, you will not find any other Indian scientist who could communicate with equal facility in English and their mother tongue.
Very interesting. And you have sort of worked with him I mean, you have been associated with him for decades. I mean, how did you see his frame change over the decades that you were working with him?
So there was that uh, restless curiosity to learn, to understand, and to know every different part of India. So he must have done field work in out of the 28 states, at least 10 or 15 of them. So when I first met him, I was 24, he was 40. That's a large age difference. I was a doctoral student. He was a full professor. In fact, he had just got a presidency at an early age, just a year before I met him. And yet we worked as equals. In the course of the writing of these two books, it was a genuine collaboration where I would critique what he had written, he would critique, I would written, we would share our ideas. It was not a guru shishya kind of relationship at all, even though I was the person who was learning from him. But this deep interest and curiosity and empathy with people. So when he was he died at the age of 83. Till his late 70s, he was doing continuous field work. After he moved to Pune, he was based in Pune, but he was deeply involved with the community forest rights movement in Gadchiroli. So he would go there for a week and a month, stay in the panchayat home, not in a hotel in Nagpur and go for a few hours and come back, a panchayat home. And then he was also very interested in Goa because his native place, Sawantwadi, is on the Konkan just north of Goa. So he got very interested in Goa and the negative impacts of mining. And what he was doing, again, this is in his 70s, when he's in his 70s, he got interested in cooperative mining. Could villagers take over the mines rather than give it to a large company that will extract for profit? Could the proceeds of mining, could mining be done sustainably and the proceeds be retained in the village? So when he was doing this research, he called me and said, Ram, you have to come to Goa. I know you're a historian, you like working in the archives, but you must occasionally do field work. And I went. I was again 16 years younger than him. He was much more adept at climbing hills, walking faster than me through the mining areas. Of course, talking to them in a mixture of Marathi and Konkani. So at this kind of, I said, deeply democratic sensibility, is so rare among scientists and, in fact, any well-known Indian. And he was very moved in Goa, just as I said. There was a remarkable priest called Father Bismarck who was murdered by the mining mafia. So he was and he dedicated one of his books to him. And he told me we have to go and visit the family of Father Bismarck. And we did. It was a very moving experience. So a great scientist who's deeply committed to democracy, environmental sustainability, who can communicate with every kind of individual, listen to them, learn from them. That was Madhav Gadgil.
And how did you bring your academic trainings together? I mean, you are a historian, sociologist. He's an ecologist, and did it have sparks flying, or where you managed to overcome the sparks when you were?
We were able. I think together? Here it's important to say a little bit about Professor Gadgil's background, particularly his father, D.R. Gadgil, who was one of India's most distinguished economists. He was deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. He started the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune, which is India's first social science institute. He was a distinguished economist. So there's a story I'd like to tell you. Vasily Leontiev, who was a Nobel laureate in economics, had come and was staying with the Gadgils, with D.R. Gadgil, and Madhav was 13, 14 years old. And Leontiev, the Nobel laureate, asked him, what do you want to do when you grow up? He said, I want to become a biologist. To which Leontiev answered, very good. Never do what your father does, especially if your father is good at what he does. Take another path. So he took another path, but he was influenced by his father. His father also had this democratic sensibility. He was an economist who did fieldwork. He was an economist who was a close friend of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. D.R. Gadgil played a vital role in nurturing the cooperative movement in Maharashtra. So from his father, he had an appreciation of the social sciences, of economics, of history. So when we started work, he was willing to listen to me. Unlike most scientists who will say, because in India, there's this art-science divide. Generally, the duds to arts and, the clever people to science. So scientists think, what is this history, sociology? Must be some, rather ordinary stuff. But he, because of his father, I think he had a very different approach, and a very inclusive, interdisciplinary approach to knowledge. So it was so uh, refreshing, educative, and sometimes even enthralling to work with him. Of course, our collaboration was from about 84 to 95, about a decade. After that, we were friends, we meted, we chatted, but we didn't really, we were close. But with anyone else, it would be much more difficult. Even with a senior historian, for example, if I was working with a senior historian, that person would have wanted to impose his or her views on me merely because they're older and more experienced and more established in the academy. Madhav was not like that at all.
Yeah, I've heard this from other people also whom he has met. Ranjit Daniels was telling me the same. Jashi Venkatesan was telling me the same. Like though he had strong ideas, he never imposed them and was willing to listen. But my question to you is, these two books, they're still being sold, Fisher Land
Yeah.
and Ecology and Equity. You looked at the natural resource system, and you also had in the second book, you had a kind of model for equitable sharing of the resources, resource use and sharing. How do you think this is? I mean, that was in a particular time frame.
Yeah.
Now it's 30 years later. I mean, how
Correct.
the political, economic, social time frame, is it still relevant, or what is its relevance
So
today?
some aspects of it are relevant, Gopi. Obviously, not all. Books are a product of the times in which they are written. Uh, this Fisher Land was, of course, mostly about the past, and it was the first attempt to look at Indian history from an ecological lens. Now, following that book, there have been many other attempts. They have taken our ideas further. Some of them have contested our ideas, but a whole field has developed, and then in some ways, we kind of opened up that field. Ecology and Equity, which, as you say, is more a policy kind of book, was written just as economic liberalization was starting. And of course, economic liberalization has now proceeded for 30 years. It has greatly expanded our economy. It has solved our foreign exchange crisis. But it has also had colossal negative environmental impacts. So if you're looking at the threat of mining in central India or in the Aravallis, if you're looking at the deadly air pollution that sweeps the cities of northern India, if you're looking at the aquifer crisis, like bedevil's farming, if you're looking at the pollution of rivers, all that makes some of the ideas in that book still relevant. Obviously, they have to be made more contemporary. But essentially, the argument was that uh, twofold. One is, like the economic liberalizers, we opposed the license permit quota raj. We said private entrepreneurship must flourish because the state can't be running hotels, making bread, manufacturing steel because they do it inefficiently and promote corruption. But private enterprise should be checked by civil society and by environmental laws so that because the market can't solve the environment, the market will only intensify the environmental problems. And as a check to the environmental externalities of economic growth, of unchecked, unbridled economic growth, you need, of course, environmental laws, but you also need a vigilant civil society. And that I think is very, very important now. Today, there's a kind of the state is overbearing. It does not like dissent. If someone comes out in the street, they're locked away in jail, sometimes for years altogether. Uh, Certainly that part of our argument is relevant. Likewise with environmental laws. I mean, the Ministry of Environment has undone almost all the progressive laws, that were implemented in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Their job is to give clearances to destructive industries and destructive mining leases as quickly as possible. So, and including on fragile areas like the coast. Now, one other aspect of our book is that it was written as the dangers of climate change were just becoming visible. 30 years later, those dangers are so stark and stare us in the face. So, responsible stewardship of natural resources, moving towards an economic model that is more frugal in its use of energy, that is more inclusive, more aware of the impact certain practices like mining and so on have on vulnerable populations, very tribal populations. In the era of climate change, it's so much more important. And the Gadgil report, which is the last major intellectual contribution of his, that was followed by his autobiography, it was more personal. But the last major intellectual contribution of Professor Gadgil was the report of the committee he chaired in the Western Ghats. And now we see with every flood, with every cyclone, with every landslide, how prescient his warnings were.
Especially so because I live in Kerala, and
You live
then
in Kerala, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, every time I mean, I sort of feel at times that people in Kerala love to hate Madhav Gadgil. His name sort of gets a lot of people riled up till the time we have a floods or we have a landslide,
Then
and
they remember
and
him.
then they remember him. So you have these two. But he also more recently, and I think perhaps because knowing him for so long, you know the background of his thinking. He also got into controversy with his 2022 statement that Wildlife Protection Act is anti-people,
Yeah.
anti-constitutional. Uh, I mean, what do you think went into his thinking? I mean, people have
So
been
he,
very unkind to him, so it's nice to
yeah.
sort of have it corrected.
So he always had an egalitarian approach to conservation, to ecology, to democracy, to public policy. The Wildlife Conservation Act was basically brought by former shikaris turned conservationists who were interested in large species, so only the tiger, the elephant, and who had a kind of almost military-like approach to conservation. Fence off the area where the tiger lives, have guns and rifles pointing at the villagers that live around, don't involve them in the management. To the contrary, intimidate them and coerce them. And but welcome affluent middle class tourists from the cities to the national parks and the tiger sanctuaries. So Gadgil rightly deplored this hypocrisy, and he wanted a more democratic approach to conservation, which is followed in some African countries like Botswana and so on, where you can still protect spectacular species, but involve the local people. They have the best knowledge in terms of tracking and guidance and so on. You can also involve them in the hospitality industry. So I think he was rather disgusted by this hypocrisy. You know, you blame and vilify the local villager, but yet you're happy to have, wealthy people coming with their cameras and saying, this is my first tiger, this is my first leopard, whose ecological footprint is actually much more, whose daily ecological footprint in their lives in the cities is a hundreds times more than an ordinary villager who lives near the tiger reserve and wants to come in for some firewood. So I think that was the kind of larger context of what he said. I mean, maybe I don't completely agree with him when he says shikar should be allowed. But yes, maybe some culling should be allowed. For example, if you go to the Nilgiris, where I visit often, I mean, you will see gaur everywhere. You know, in the town square of Kunur and Kotagiri, you will see gaur. Now, there's generally a problem there, right? So I think uh, his ideas came from the importance of uh, matching and conservation with social justice. The wildlife lobby is only interested in conservation, they're not interested in social justice. The human rights activists are only interested in social justice, not in conservation. He was one of the rare people who saw that both are vitally important.
Thank you, Ram. I want to round this discussion by asking you what you think will be his. I mean, how would future remember him? Because two statements you make about him in your chapter in how much should a person consume. I mean, one he says that I mean one you say that he hasn't done too much of writing. I mean, for a
Yeah, yeah,
person of his caliber should have
that's right.
written much more, and history, I mean, sorry, future usually looks at a
Yeah,
person through the person's
yeah,
writing. Two is he was totally without cynicism.
yeah,
So I mean, both these put together,
yeah.
I mean, how would you sort of?
So I think How Much Should a Person Consume was published in 2006. So my first criticism of is that he hasn't done the kind of writing, he hasn't apart from his early scientific papers and the two books he wrote with me, he hasn't produced the kind of because his knowledge was immense. His knowledge of the landscapes, the people, the lifestyles, the economic practices of Indians was unequal. No one had that kind of knowledge. Now, that criticism has been of mine was addressed in what he did after my book was published. There were two important, vitally important publications of it. One was the Gadgil report, which is online and discussed. The other was his autobiography, which was, if I may say so, partly written because of my chastisement. And I was one of the first readers of it. I also helped in getting Penguin to publish it. I got a very fine editor, Rivka Israel, to copy edit the manuscript. And that autobiography has appeared in 8 languages. Now, I'll just tell you a story of the kind of human being Madhav was. The release was in Pune. I told him we'll have the release in Bangalore, which is where he did his best scientific work, but he was very old and couldn't travel. He was unwell. So I went to Pune for the release in 2023. And the English edition was released along with 8 language editions. And all the translators were honored on the desk. So the Malayalam translator, the Telugu translator, the Kannada translator, the Gujarati translator, they were all on the desk with Madhav. So that is the kind of person he was. So he addressed that criticism partly through these two book length publications, the Gadgil report and his autobiography. I'm sure one day some young ecologist or some young historian will write a biography of his because he was such an amazing person. There are lots of people around they can talk to. His optimism was unquenchable, and till the end he had faith in ordinary folks. He would not even when he was very ill. In his last 2 or 3 years, he was staying with his daughter in Pune. He could hardly move out. Occasionally, he went for a seminar, but basically he was homebound. He could not go to Gadchiroli, he could not go to Goa, he could not go to Northeast, he could not go to the Western Ghats, all the places he would travel, even late into his 70s. But optimism was unquenchable. And that, I think, for some of us who tend to get bitter and cynical at the way both nature and society and the state are going, I think that's something we should take nourishment from.
Thank you, Ram, very much for your time. And one thing that I really noticed was, we were remembering Madhav, but the occasion is sad, but I think both of us had far more smile on, laughter on.
We have to celebrate his life. We have to celebrate his life. And we are having a meeting in Bangalore on the 26th, Republic Day appropriately, where we will celebrate his life and many people who knew him will speak. So we have to celebrate his life and his work and carry on his legacy.
And that is how perhaps we should all remember Dr. Madhav Gadgil.